Salam AAC. Firstly, I'd like to thank the leadership board of the Afghan-American Conference for inviting me to address you all here today. Specifically, Lida Jan and Arash Jan, thank you for your guidance and support while preparing for this exciting weekend. To see such thoughtful planning for this conference has been inspiring to witness, and I'm certain that you'll all leave here emboldened to bring about change and support for our community. This weekend will bring both the best out of you, but also our collective conscience as Afghans nestled in every corner of the world. When I was preparing for this keynote address, I knew it required an introduction to who I am, an Afghan who has spent half of their life straddling between their motherland and their adopted country of Canada. I was originally going to jump right into my biography, but yesterday was a particularly difficult day for me. June 16th meant that it had been 1 year since the passing of my friend Sohrab. You may know of him as Colonel Sohrab Azimi, who was killed alongside 22 of his fellow commandos last year in Faryab province. Sohrab was a part of the Afghan Special Forces Unit, the most elite commando subset of the Ehtesab. To me, Sohrab was a ball of energy and a fierce, fierce patriot. Just as much as he loved Herati music, he loved to scream the national anthem on special occasions. Sohrab was also deeply in love. His wife, Erica, is Latin American. They met in the US while Sohrab was completing military training. The Sohrab whom I admire the most is through the love he had for Erica and fighting to ensure the safety of Afghans, but also for his fellow citizens. It was one of Erica's wishes that I remind you all of this, that there was much more to Sohrab than what you saw in the news headlines. And this goes for most of what involves Afghanistan today. Many complicated, conflicting, and confusing narratives. My story, for example, may differ in detail from yours, but ultimately a vein binds us all, that being the journey of Afghans maneuvering an uncertain world due to 40 years of cyclical warfare. My story also doesn't begin at birth in Kabul, but actually in New York. In 2000, as the world welcomed a new millennium, I sat on the entrance steps of Vive la Casa, a homeless shelter in Buffalo City. Like many days at Vive la Casa, I watched dozens of shelter residents with anxious eyes follow an old man towards an old bulletin board. I clenched a piece of paper with 3 different spellings of my last name. Translation was a luxury. Many people sold their valuables for an opportunity to meet with lawyers who could further their appeal. My mother vainly attempted to explain to the shelter's legal advocate that she was from Afghanistan, could not understand the Iranian translator. As a result, our papers ended up with 3 different spellings of our last name. It was because of this mishap that it became my job every day at 8:30 a.m. to stand in front of the board and scan the long list for any of those spelling variants before the postings were ripped off in a frenzy. My mother had spent her entire life trying to reach safety, with our year at Vive la Casa only being another attempt in a seemingly futile endeavor. She was a single mother, which to this day remains a taboo to say out loud in Afghan circles. But it's a badge my mother wears with pride, and one which has grounded me as an Afghan woman as well. As a conclusion to the story, eventually, yes, our moment arrived. At the bottom of one of those immigration lists, which I had been watching for weeks, I found Wahedi, a 4-spelling variant at the bottom of the long list. My mother heard my screams from the second floor of the shelter. Later that week, the 3 of us, my mother, my brother, and I, stood on the US side of Niagara Falls with my mother beaming a big grin down at us. She threw everything we had in the rushing water, our memories, our photos, our documents. Hand in hand, we headed for the Canadian border. This memory was foundational for me, our journey as refugees. Even during high school, I'd always been drawn to the refugee experience. How does one integrate? What does it mean to integrate? Physically, mentally, spiritually. What are we expected to keep from our motherland? And what are we to shirk to become productive citizens of our new countries? I had witnessed many of my friends, one of them who was Afghan, struggle with the expectations of her family, a family which was a textbook example of relentless discipline. Her lack of agency to seek clarity and support in maneuvering the expectations of Afghan tradition, family, and Canadian adolescence kept her isolated. She constantly voiced her frustration at the lack of a handbook, something that immigrant youth could reference when blindsided by the realities of the journey of integration. For us as Afghans, especially following the US occupation in 2001, this was exacerbated by the assumptions, sometimes vitriolic, of those who knew very little about us. Growing up in a small rural town in Western Canada, I understand this journey well. When I graduated high school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to pursue, deciding to take a stint at political science at the University of British Columbia. After a year of studies, I began my summer break working at a nonprofit called Success, which assisted in immigrant and refugee integration cases in Vancouver. The office was understaffed and overworked, and I began juggling many positions, observing and learning quickly from my seniors. The summer rolled into the fall, and my manager asked if I was interested in a research position. This transitioned into 3 years of dedication to the field of integration policy and social development. In 2017, a research firm based in Paris requested to use our research for a toolkit in Kenya to support refugees streaming in from the countries' surrounding borders. Due to the success of that toolkit, the firm asked me about what my plans were for the summer and offered me a position in Afghanistan to work specifically in the field of reintegration of Afghans coming in from Pakistan and Iran. I jumped at the chance and moved to Kabul a few weeks later. What I appreciated about the firm was their focus on including both diasporic and national knowledge to approach problems and solutions, both playing a symbiotic and supportive role. It's one of the first pieces of advice that I can share from my personal experience. Follow the use of lived experience. There are many NGOs, CSOs, and consultancies which have executed this well, but it's on the onus of the candidate to research their place of employment and to ensure that their work will be beneficial to the community they work for, rather than exacerbating issues. Read between the fine lines, ask questions, and don't be afraid to challenge something that concerns you. It will only evoke strength and principle, and it's one of the most successful approaches I've used throughout my career. Any red flags, any pushback, and you know it's not where you should be, and where your work and time can be better utilized elsewhere. One of my roles in my research position was to interview then President Ashraf Ghani's senior advisor on social development and migration. As my contract was ending, he notified me that the UN was hiring for a similar role to support the president's office. He suggested that I apply. After the position exhausted every opportunity for national staff to pursue, I was asked to attend 3 interviews, after which I was offered the role. In retrospect, ensuring that my role couldn't be filled by national staff was imperative to me. As I mentioned earlier, there is a role for those of us who wish to contribute back home, but in a way which is symbiotic and cognizant to the reality of those who live in Afghanistan, have never left, and most likely will never leave. Knowing that you belong in a workplace and can productively contribute will somewhat alleviate imposter syndrome and allow you to focus on the work you need to do. Some of the projects which I am to this very day proud to have supported, as Leader John mentioned, include the 2018 National Reintegration Plan, which assisted with the repatriation of over 2 million Afghans returning from Iran and Pakistan, and the Ishtighal Zai Karmandana project led by the World Bank, which provided urban center revitalization support and public-private projects to support returnees in gaining stable work to begin reintegrating back in Afghanistan. Now, it's painful to reflect on, interviewing and meeting Afghans who are clinging onto the hope of a stable Afghanistan, leaving their homes in Iran and Pakistan to give another chance to their ancestral lands, only to have that dream stripped away once again in August 2021. August of last year, incidentally, requires its own time of reflection, which I'll come back to in a few moments. What many of you can attest to is that the life of an Afghan is composed of life-altering moments that can be both joyous and heart-wrenching. On May 8th, 2018, I experienced the latter. During my time at the President's office, I didn't use bulletproof vehicles or official transport, which became a running joke with my colleagues. Living with my grandparents, I was always humbled to remember why I was working back home. Anything which isolated me versus my community was dangerous, because the reality of my work was starkly different from what was actually happening. I wanted to see the daily hustle and bustle of the city center, meet Kabul residents, ask about their daily frustration, and listen as much as I could. It was during one of those very familiar walks on my way home that my life changed forever. A few minutes from turning onto my street, I heard screamings about a vest. Seconds later, a deafening sound shook the ground beneath my feet. I looked back and saw a plume of fire and smoke, a mushroom cloud reaching far into the sky. 2 back-to-back suicide attacks organized by ISIS attacked the Indian visa office. It took 12 hours for the army to infiltrate and disarm them. The entire ordeal was visible from my balcony. Those suicide attacks forever impacted the lives of people who had become family to me. The Karachiwan I visited daily from Bolani, and the shop owners who had had their businesses destroyed. We were under lockdown in our homes until the next day, waking up to an eerily silent street. I asked a taxi driver if he knew the number of the police department in our district. He responded with a shrug. I asked a friend if he knew who to contact about the loss of electricity. He didn't have an answer for me. After several similar interactions, I wondered why we didn't have an efficient method to contact city officials or a means through which Kabul citizens could be kept informed of security alerts or other important updates in the city. I spent the next day sleepless, bursting with ideas of how to bridge the communication gap between citizens and city officials. Ultimately, I founded a startup called Ehtesab, a cognate use of Dari and Pashto words, meaning accountability. From July 2018, our team of 3 had expanded to a team of 20 just days before the Taliban takeover. By chance, during an early morning taxi ride that week, I noticed that the driver turned up the volume during a talk show called Safai Shah, which was hosted by Humayun Danishiyar and Masood Sanjar, 2 of Afghanistan's veteran journalists from Tolo. The show began promptly at 7 a.m., with Danishiyar booming that it was time to see some accountability for a recent electricity outage which left Kabul in the dark for days. Dozens of callers vented their frustrations. Their children couldn't study during the evenings. It was difficult to prepare dinner, and staying warm at night was impossible without heaters. Danishiyar asked another co-host, Sima Safa, to call the Bishna Sharkat spokesperson. Within a few moments, a groggy, sleepy voice answered the phone. Danishiyar yelled, "Mr. Spokesman, you're enjoying your sleep, but what about us?" Quickly, the spokesman shared a mix of excuses and deadlines to get the electricity running again. Within a few moments, 2 journalists became the neighborhood heroes for thousands of Afghans. Citizen engagement, collective accountability, direct action. Till this very day, both Danishiyar and Sanjar Saib and Sima Safa are hailed as true patriots and changemakers for our country, bringing about change that people could expect in their lifetime, rather than the bureaucratic benchmarks and budgetary restrictions that destroyed public trust in governance. For a country where promise after promise was broken, collaboration was catharsis. These experiences solidified the idea of the Ehtesab platform. It had to provide a service to the user. It had to build trust, but it could only sustain itself through citizen engagement. The change couldn't come from us, but collectively, from all community members. Ehtesab went through 3 conceptual design phases. The first concept was to rate the performance of city officials, where Kabul residents would be connected with a municipality representative who would be responsible to respond to their concerns. And similar to a structure like Google Reviews or Yelp, crowdsourced ratings would pressure officials to keep up to date with issues. The main obstacle with this concept was government involvement, where we were met with one closed door after another. Officials didn't want their employees to be placed on a public platform and open to criticism. Their counteroffer was that Ehtesab would come under the management of the government. Reports sent in by users would be able to be viewed by officials, data could be hidden or deleted, and no official information would be made public. At that time, I had to make the difficult decision to go ahead with Ehtesab without the government's involvement, which in hindsight, I'm relieved by. But for civic technology to be robust and sustainable, government involvement is imperative. Even with Ehtesab's mission for accountability, transparency, and citizen engagement, the government of the day cannot be set aside. Our final design is the one that is currently being used by thousands of Ehtesab users. It was chosen following our citywide survey, which collected the responses of Kabul residents and asked them a simple question. If we could help your phone become a tool to assist your daily life in Kabul, what would you want your phone to do? 87% resoundingly said, access to trustworthy, timely, and updated information. What kind of information? Security, electricity, and traffic were the most popular categories. Following the citywide survey, our team got to work on the final draft. Fast forward a year later to March 2020, and Ehtesab, under the technical leadership of Netlinks, Afghanistan's most notable tech company, had just launched its beta version of both the iOS and Android apps. A simple platform which was only meant to provide a map, an alert feature, and a report page. On the first day of our launch, we received 3 reports. A group of dogs in Shadak area which were unsafe and attacking residents, a house which was being accused of a drug and alcohol ring, and a corrupt city official. Our team ended that day in cheers and hugs. 3 reports on our first day of launching. It was a start, but it was a start that was 2 years in the making. Some of the pivots we made during the beta included a questionnaire during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, which provided users assistance to monitor their symptoms and provide information both Dari and Pashto on hospitals, emergency advice, and contacts at the Ministry of Public Health. Our most notable pivot was our alerts feature, which has now become the most popular feature of the Ehtesab app. In June 2021, we launched our countrywide media campaign. Our team, including women, went out and spoke on all of the major news channels in Afghanistan. Front and center, They explained how the app worked, and our downloads averaged at 100 per day. At that time, the Taliban skirmish began to gain traction, but we never believed that August 15th would have become a reality, even a few weeks prior. That week was when Sohrab was killed, one of our country's fiercest patriots who died moments after protecting his commando team in the line of battle. For him and in his honor, our battle had to go on. We had to keep fighting. As June rolled into July, and July became August, tensions were high, but morale was higher. We were planning campaigns to work with the ANDSF, supporting our soldiers, planning another pivot to raise money for their families. On August 14th, a month after I had left Afghanistan to begin my studies in the US, I was sitting with a journalist for an interview with a Canadian newspaper. I received a WhatsApp voice message from one of our security informants. I was surprised. I asked for a quick break to listen. During the entire year that the informant was with us at Ehtesab, providing us intel, he never shared his voice with us. I played it hesitantly. A tremor in his voice was evident. Quickly, hesitantly, he stated, "The Taliban will enter Pulchakhi prison at 5 a.m. It's now midnight. They will release the prisoners. Keep your family safe. They will enter the city and Kabul will fall." At that moment, a mixture of fear and doubt entered my brain. That entire month was drowning with disinformation. And there were reports that the ANDSF was pushing the Taliban back. How could they be 24 hours away from the capital? Surely after 2 decades, the capital couldn't fall in a day. So I went on with my meeting. 8 hours later, Talibs would be sitting in Ashraf Ghani's office on live TV. That morning, as the Ehtesab team began their day early for another intense day of tracking incidents in Kabul and the surrounding provinces, conflicting reports were being shared on multiple security groups. We remained hopeful, but hesitant. At 10 a.m., suddenly, a report stated that the Taliban were in Paghman. We assumed a few cars. Then, like wildfire, panic ensued. Intel was disappearing. People were logging off, saying that they needed to check in on their families. INSO, the global security company which provided Kabul's diplomats, embassies, and elites with near-time, real information, also stopped tracking incidents. That was when the videos of the Taliban entering Kabul's gates hit social media. My stomach felt like it had suddenly become lodged in my throat. In our WhatsApp group, I typed slowly and pressed send. "Team, should we shut down Ehtesab?" Everyone was online. Some people would type, then stop. A few minutes later, the silence broke. One of our female team members texted, "I think we should keep going. How can we suddenly disappear like everyone else?" My eyes were shuttered. My hands were drenched with tears. We kept working. The Taliban entered the city and our team went into hiding. They entered our office on the first day. Since then, our work has been remote. We decided to continue posting, but we would never recover from the brain drain that collapsed in literal minutes. Before August 15th, we were able to send alerts within 5 minutes. Now, we're happy if we can verify an incident within an hour. Since August 15th, Ehtesab hasn't been offline once. While everyone left and literally logged off from Afghanistan, Ehtesab has stood firm on its mission. We anticipated only being able to continue operations until a few months after the Taliban takeover, but we've pushed through. Under the veil of WhatsApp and data packages, the Ehtesab team continues to watch over Kabul, providing any sigh of relief for our users, to know that they can trust our verified, near real-time alerts. We've had many terrifying moments as well. One of our team members was detained by the Taliban for a few days. Another was being actively house-searched. Our chief technology officer, Nilufar, escaped to Pakistan, but we've kept going. Recently, we've noticed a quiet revolt through our user reports. Kabul residents sharing incidents about corruption, abuses at border stops by the Taliban, explosions and gunfire. We want to continue providing agency for people to speak out, and will continue to do so as long as we can keep the lights on at Ehtesab. There are Afghans who want to shine a guiding light during these dark and difficult times. Whether it's Ehtesab or other countless initiatives across the country, it's up to us Afghans to stand for our country and our people. Thankfully, for AAC, they've provided you with that catalyst. Through today's sessions, through those sitting on your left and on your right, your answer is here. The guilt, the anxiety, the trauma, I can understand all of you to my very core. To watch August 15th unfold, especially from afar, is nothing less than a form of mental torture. Yet you've taken the first step. It starts by being here. supporting each other, engaging in dialogue, feeding your minds and hearts with knowledge and wisdom. I promise you, there's nowhere better than with your own community to lead your form of protest, innovation, or activism. Whether it's the speakers of this weekend's sessions, the facilitators, the organizers, or even myself, we're here to support you. Share your ideas. Don't be afraid to take chances, and remember to listen with intent and empathy. Remember, sustainable change is incremental. It's quiet in its revolution, but unstoppable when supported by community. The change we lead cannot cease, and it shows no sign of stopping. Afghanistan isn't the graveyard of empires. Don't allow anyone to belittle it as such. It's a pedestal in which generation after generation of patriots stand on, passionately aimed at building the Afghanistan of tomorrow. This is without a doubt a period of darkness which has fallen on our country, but darkness is unsustainable, and the light of that darkness spreads across this very room. May God bless Afghanistan and our people. Thank you.
Everyone feeling okay? All right, Sarah John, thank you so much for that moving and inspirational speech. We do have a couple of questions for you before we let you go.
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. So when you decided to keep the app open, how did you feel about that? How did you feel about the decision in that moment? And how do you feel about that decision now?
Well, I first wanted to ask my team because I was at the time in New York City, and I felt extremely uncomfortable making the decision on their behalf. So it was the first thing. It was the day that the Taliban entered. So I asked, "Do you want to keep going?" And they said yes. And then it was really just up to them. And I said, "Whenever you feel like you want to stop, or we want to take a break, then we'll go by the team's decision." But because first what happened was when the evacuation of the airport happened, a lot of international media, CNN, BBC, the American government, Canadian, like a lot of different groups were messaging us asking, like, okay, can you help us facilitate some of the withdrawals? And we did help a little bit, but at the same time, we were more focused on getting our teams out and just trying to assist the ones who can't leave. I empathize with those who wanted to, but at the same time, our focus has always been Afghanistan and those who can't leave. So we assisted with the airport evacuations, and then, as things kind of died down a little bit, the first few days were quite intense. I even had CCTV of the Taliban entering my house at the time, and just them looking around. It was terrifying because, these are your sacred spaces, your office, your home. And it emboldened us to keep doing our work. But, so the first while was a little bit concerning with the safety. And then I would say around October, it died down to the point where the team went back to the office to see if everything was there. The Taliban had taken a lot of our computers and things like that. Thankfully, there was nothing confidential on those. And then, working from home, we provided data packages to the team, and also we're trying to get generators to them because the electricity is getting so bad. But we've made it work. Obviously, like I mentioned before, we had some security problems. But the team, I think it's a form of catharsis for them. They want to feel like they're giving back, and they want to feel like they're doing something. It's difficult because there's no jobs and they don't want to just sit at home. So being able to send alerts, and when we get our reviews, and we have users who send us reports like, today I went to the market with my grandpa, and we were like minutes away from exploding. You sent an alert to. So thank you so much. And we get reviews like that. So that keeps us going as well. It's just these amazing feedback that we get from users saying, I went here, and then there was an explosion near me, and you sent me an alert. I called my family and friends. So just that little bit of being able to give back keeps us going.
Yeah, no, and that definitely makes sense, and it's crazy to hear you just say it in such plain language. It's so casual, but it's the reality for a lot of folks. Mm-hmm. So as you know, we do have a lot of students here, and so I'm sure they're wondering, how do you balance it all? How do you balance your school and work, especially as CEO at Ehtesab? How do you do it?
Well, I've been living the whole 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. kind of life for 4 or 5 years now, where I'm after whatever I'm doing in the day, I start basically I log on to work at 8 p.m. and then I'm online until 1 p.m. So at least I have a few hours with my team to just catch up and talk about things. So I've created a little bit of a schedule, but also just subconsciously, I'm also able to work throughout the day. So I'll check my WhatsApp messages, I'll check emails, but also it's doing something that you love. I feel like it's become a cliche, but I've done the whole okay, do stuff for your family and whatever. But at the end of the day, you're taking a huge risk because there are days when you don't want to wake up, you don't want to do what you're doing. And for me, I love what I do. I love technology, I love development, design, product design. So it's what I love to do. At the same time, my school is also things that I love to study. So for example, right now, I recently made the switch of moving from human rights to urban studies and architecture with data science and engineering because I realized through Columbia that I'm more interested in design, architecture, and urban studies through the lens of technology and engineering. So you find your way, but I would also say don't be afraid to just leave whatever you're doing and just start afresh. And it's a cliche again that there's no time. You have a lot of time, so yeah, just go out and I changed my major at like 26, so who cares?
Yeah, but like my Afghan parents are probably like, don't do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so last question. What is your vision for the Afghan diaspora all around the world?
Well, I haven't really taken part in a lot of discussions on social media like Twitter because I'm waiting for the whole shock to kind of settle with the diaspora. I think there's a knee-jerk response, especially those who don't really know about Afghanistan before August 2021. I mean, it's not what a lot of the diaspora thinks. This whole ethnic thing and the language thing. I mean, like I said, my close group of friends since 2016, I didn't know which ethnicity they were until 5 months ago, when suddenly people were like, oh, where are you from? And then we had to figure out, where are you from? Where am I from? We didn't care about those things. And I think that's much more important to the diaspora than it is in Afghanistan. It's not that big of an issue. So I would say I'm waiting for them to take some time to come to events like these, to meet other Afghans and realize, okay, we're always told that Afghans are extremely hospitable. Every foreigner tells us that in their books and in their movies and in their documentaries. Why are we hospitable to each other? Why do we speak with such a vitriol and such negativity with each other? You can be hospitable to foreigners, but you can't be hospitable to a Tajik or a Pashtun. What does this mean? So I'm waiting for this to settle down before I get involved. And I think what I would say is, meet other Afghans, see them for who they are, see them for what they work, what they're doing. Don't belittle someone, because you can't choose your DNA, you can't choose your language. You can choose who you are. So that's the first thing I would say is let your anger settle, let your whatever you're feeling settle, and then come back constructively and talk about things that you love to do and find those that you can collaborate with. Because otherwise we're just going to have this thing. I mean, why is this war happening? Why did the Civil War happen in the 90s? Because we're subjugating ourselves into very small, very irrelevant boxes. So like my team, I don't know where any of them are from. I just know their names. I know them for Hodis and Naveed and Kafar, and I don't know them for their ethnicity, and they don't want to be known for that, right? So let your anger settle, but come back to the table when you're ready to be constructive and not judgmental, because we only have ourselves. There's no one else who's going to help us. If that's done, you have to understand, we're all we have.